Next on the Lectures in History podcast, William and Mary lecturer Robyn Schroeder examines a little-known Revolutionary War site in Williamsburg, where colonial troops built an encampment ahead of the decisive 1781 Battle of Yorktown. Speaking near the historic grounds, Professor Schroeder explains how the site served as a key staging area, where soldiers lived, trained, and prepared for the final campaign against British forces. More in a moment.
Welcome to a very special edition of History 413, revising and revisiting Revolution, the campus at William and Mary. We are here today with the topic of the college camp. This is what the sixth day in human history where we could have stood and said we're at the likely site of the college camp, because we have just located it as of last week, as you all know. And we're here today with a couple of guests. We have Rob Garnett, who's here from the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown, where he's an historical interpreter, to help us understand what the encampment site was and how it would have been used, and what did a Continental soldier carry and where, and what the space would have been like. And Shannon White, who's back with us from the Center for Geospatial Analysis, to help us with this now that we're standing in this landscape, try to understand what made this a good site for an encampment that was used at least for 3 years, 1775 to 78, and heavily used when a portion of the 20,000 soldiers who came to this part of Virginia before Yorktown used it as a staging ground. So I'm going to start by reviewing some of the things we know about how we got here, but with a little bit more detail than we've had before, so we're all on the same page about the big question, which is the intuition that the college camp and Lafayette's encampment site are in fact the same place. And one of the questions I'm going to ask, spoiler alert, prepare yourselves, is do you believe this intuition now that you're here? So remember, August Ordinance, 1775, 3rd Virginia Convention, moves into defensive posture, sends Patrick Henry, sort of symbolically, to come and find a site to sort of diffuse the situation of the volunteer militias and start having a regular army in Virginia. September 13th, mid-September, the Virginia Gazette in 1775 says that Colonel Henry has been in town and he's located a campsite behind the college. And for hundreds of years, that is as much geographical information as anyone had about the location of that campsite. And that led, I think, to the assumption that it was immediately behind the college, on the other side of the creek, nearer to the Wren Building and the historic campus. What we know about how it would have been used, and that makes us think maybe that's not the case, one is that the other side of the creek was heavily wooded. The other is that there were elite gentlemen, youths in the grammar school and the college who were living and working, because the university was open until January of 1781. What we also know is that the many thousands of soldiers who came to Williamsburg answering this call to raise both the first 2 Virginia regiments and the militia would have been a humongous disruption to a town of maybe 2,000 to 4,000 people, depending on the time of year. So not just something in the ballpark of 1,000 soldiers in the fall of 1775 while everyone's worrying about getting rid of Dunmore. They're going to remember in the 4th convention that takes place at the college, they're going to quintuple the size of the army. There will be 9 regiments in 1776. People will come here in droves in those early years. They're going to build more encampment sites. That'll be one reason why after 1778 this site seems to fall somewhat out of use. So they build a barracks behind the governor's palace. There are guards that are stationed all around the perimeters of town at places like Burrell's Ferry and at Jamestown Island. I guess I'll press fast forward and say the college camp has been talked about alongside the build-up to Yorktown without anyone ever sort of putting together that they might have been the same site. Even at the bicentennial, they put a plaque in 1976 at the top of the sunken garden that said on this site there was a college camp, and also soldiers were here before Yorktown. It's only recently that Wilfred Kael and other historians thought, we have all these French military maps, right, that we've looked at. And it seems so likely as we think about it that the logics that would have led, as we know, Lafayette and his American troops to encamp here, and Saint-Simon's artillery to be moved over here, they would have likely in 1781 been using a proven site, a site that already existed, that had been cleared, that had already been used to train soldiers in previous years. And the reason why we can say here is that a couple months ago I was very lucky to meet Shannon's team over in the Center for Geospatial Analysis, show them the map, which it wasn't Shannon's first time seeing, as you know. And I said, can I help you figure out where specifically in current space this was? And they said, no, we'll georeference it for you. Let us do this work, we're professionals. And they have achieved this result kind of wonderfully that brings us here. So now that brings us to what the logic is of being here. Does it pass your intuitive smell test that the college campsite and Lafayette's encampment site ought to be the same site? Can I note one more fact of the landscape before I ask the next question, which is, in 1775 or 1781, this creek would have been a creek and would have been the boundary of the 330-acre tract of our campus, which is to say the campus ended on that side of the creek. And up here, we don't actually know who owned this land in 1775. Does it still make sense to you, given what you know from having seen this map in your lives, to call it the college camp? Yeah, Kevin.
Well, if it's the same camp as another army, it seems kind of presumptuous to assume that it's the college's camp. It's probably just for logistics reasons that they were the same camp. I think it just kind of brings more importance to the college that's not necessary.
It shows up as the college camp in successive Virginia gazettes. Horses were stolen up at the college campsite. An indentured servant named Tom ran away from the college campsite. Yeah, Alexa.
I agree with Gavin, partially because even if this was private land, it's so close to the boundary that it would make sense to call it the college camp instead of being like the camp of like this guy's land that's right next to the college. Like that's just that you know where to come to. You know that it's by the college, so it's more of like a placement of it.
The most significant thing it is close to is the college. It is behind the college. It is about a half mile behind the college. It's a 10-minute walk. It's still close to town, whether or not we use it that way. So that's the logic that we were feeling. All right. Well, this brings us to you guys and you guys. Look around you. Imagining an encampment that spreads from here along the high ground behind us where the new construction, up along to the front of Capitol Arena. So crossing UCrop, right by the Commons Dining Hall. This is a long encampment. Why would it be here? Does it make sense that it would be here? I'm gonna send this to you guys, so after Shiloh.
I was just thinking fresh water is on site.
Yeah, and that's important. I think as we look at it right now, when you were walking down to get to the site that we're meeting, on the left side you saw the creek flowing. On the right side you saw the space that is where we've dammed it and we're using it for other purposes, but it still flows through when it needs an overflow. So it would have been much more like this space over here, and it probably was a little bit wider, and at certain times of the year it would get very flooded because it's Williamsburg. We have that, right? Where it gets really wet and then it gets really dry and you just kind of go, okay. And so knowing that this ravine that we know as Wildflower Refuge, that creek starts up near Cromdell and on the back side of the Wren and that area, and that water would have been flowing because, like we said in class, what direction does water flow? Downhill, exactly. It's always going to flow downhill. It doesn't matter if it's east, west, north, or south, it's always flowing downhill. So you have this sloping space that's coming down, and we looked at that. Remember in class when we were talking about the hatcher marks that were on the map? And we know when we start looking at that map that we have in our place number 13 that we are just below that, right? We know that we are looking at, oh, not 13, sorry, 9. Got myself 9 and 12, because remember we've got the bend in the map from where they scanned it. But we know that we've got high ground right there, and this is where we have the artillery. This is where we have all of those parts and pieces of the university, as we call it now, but the college then, and how that plays out with the artillery and with the different spaces that we have. And so those hatcher marks are right along this ridge line. And we can still see it today. We can see where the water still comes down through here. Now at this point in time, we have pathways. So it's been channelized and there's a pipe that's running underneath of you. But imagine no construction taking place today in any direction, kind of a quieter space, but hearing the murmurings, right? Because it's how many people in this camp?
Depends if you count San Simone's army, but in Lafayette's alone, people are coming, going, 3,300.
Yeah, so imagine half of the population of the undergraduates all gathered in this space back here between where the Randolph complex used to be, going all the way up to Kaplan, right? And you're not just going to be standing there looking at each other, you're going to be chatting, right? So that noise is going to come about. And then I'm going to turn it over to you for the sights, the smells, because Rob knows what the military space of that's going to look like. And we'll come back to the map and we'll come back to what we're thinking with that.
Yeah, so what would this have looked like? How would they have used it? What do you like about the site?
Okay, well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with y'all today. My name is Rob Garnett, and I've been a historical interpreter in a recreated camp for about 3.5 years. So I've spent 40 hours a week in the camp, and I can comment on a few things. Since we're on the topic of water, why is water important to a military encampment? What are the soldiers going to do with that water? What do you need water for?
Drinking, washing.
You need good drinking water. Hopefully the camp is located near a fresh running stream or some wells in town. You need drinking water. What other reason? Sanitation. Keeping the soldiers in the camp clean is crucial to their health. At this point, can I pass around a few items? Or okay. So in terms of the soldiers keeping clean, they're going to do a few things. Typically, the soldier would bathe about once a week. But they're going to wash their hands and face daily. They're also ordered to shave every 2 to 3 days. So I brought a few interpretive items. Are we able to pass these around?
I'd start there and I'll collect it on this.
Okay. So we've got a straight razor, a brush, and a comb for grooming. We also have some soap here. The soldier might be issued soap from the quartermaster. If he's got some spending money, he could also buy some extra soap.
So in terms of fodder for imagination, you imagine even brackish water for cleaning is basically fine. They're likely using this water to clean.
Yep. The quality of the water might not be that great, and of course that can pose some issues in terms of health. So water for grooming and drinking, and the soldiers are also going to use water for cooking. The soldiers' daily ration included 3 items. The first would be about a pound of salted or brined meat. It could be pork, beef, or fish, and also a pound of this stuff. Many people would call it hard tack. During Revolutionary War, called hard bread. It is simply flour, water, and maybe a pinch of salt baked until dry. So a pound of meat, a pound of hard bread, and then to top that off, about a half pint of dried vegetables. So some beans, peas, or rice perhaps. And the best way to cook that salted and dried food is through what? How would you cook it? Are you gonna grill it or roast it?
You're gonna boil it?
Correct. If the food's been dehydrated, the best way to prepare it is to rehydrate it. So toss everything into a kettle full of water, boil that food for a few hours, and then the soldier's typical meal was a bowl of stew around 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I wanted to ask you, I ran into a source that said a guy who was here in the Pennsylvania line with Anthony Wayne, he would have encamped here before Yorktown, who said they weren't allowed to eat before noon. He mentions actually only one of the summer engagements that they were in, I don't remember if it was Spencer's Ordinary or Green Spring, that he'd only had blackberries to eat all day, which is to say it doesn't sound like the ration was going around. So ideally, what you described as ideal. What is actually happening are food shortages,
Right.
presumably.
Yeah, what I just described would be the ideal situation. The quartermaster has enough food to distribute, but if the ration was lacking, the soldier would have to improvise. A few things he can do. One, forage. Go out into the woods and look for things like blackberries, maybe some pecans. We know that during the siege of Yorktown, late September into October 1781, one soldier jotted down in his diary that he and his fellow soldiers went crabbing in a nearby creek. So fishing and crabbing, also a possibility. The soldier might obtain some string and fashion a hook. So we've got some fishing line here. And worst case scenario, if the army is in desperate need for food, they might confiscate food from a local farmer. And in that case, the army would take food and give the farmer something called a promissory note, what we might call an IOU today. Basically a slip of paper saying at some point you'll get paid. So how do you think the farmer felt about that? Not a very good.
Are we supposed to be fighting a war against soldiers coming in and taking our stuff?
That's a very good point. Whether the army is friendly or not, it's going to pose issues for the local population. But typically, the Continental Army, they would try to pay the farmers back. You don't want to burn the farmer's fences or steal his chickens, because then you're going to lose that civilian support of the army. And if you don't have that, the war effort is going to be jeopardized.
And I'm going to interject something, just local knowledge. Do you all know where Newtown is in Williamsburg? So when I was growing up in Williamsburg, that was hay fields, and it was a orchard of both walnut and pecan trees. And that was throughout the 1900s. So I can only imagine that the soil was probably still being used for those same types of parts and pieces. Is there something you haven't seen? Here you go. There we go. So thinking through kind of proximity, can you all walk from here to Newtown? If you were hungry and you can eat tree nuts, would you walk there if you were hungry enough? Okay, so thinking about that, also growing up, we used to walk along fence lines where they kept cattle and things like that, and blackberries will grow naturally in the landscape. And I can tell you that blackberries are very, very common here in Virginia. And if you do go out in the woods, you can sometimes still come across blackberry bushes. And so thinking about like what we see on a map and what we don't see on a map, we don't see those natural food sources on a map. But the soldiers are not just staying in place, right, Rob? Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what day-to-day looks like beyond the kind of cleanliness and eating. What else are they doing?
Okay. Yeah, I was going to pose the question, when you think of your daily life at home and the chores that you have to accomplish, typically it involves cooking or cleaning, right? The soldiers would also spend a lot of time drilling, so handling the musket properly, cleaning or repairing the musket, and also going through the maneuvers. One thing that the officers would turn to would be what some people called the Blue Book, or Order and Discipline of the Troops. Does anybody know which officer helped Washington tremendously at Valley Forge to professionalize the Army?
Baron von Steuben.
Von Steuben, that is correct. So Steuben produced this book here. It goes through various exercises. I'll also point out the layout of the camp here. So this is how the camp would be organized. But the soldiers would drill perhaps 8 hours a day, and that's going to be your professional frontline soldier. Can I pass around the coats? Please. Is that okay? So Your Continental Army soldier is going to wear a regimental coat like you see here. Typically the Americans wore a blue wool jacket. The red facings and cuffs here indicate that this soldier is from a mid-Atlantic colony. So Virginia troops would have worn something like this, with the epaulette green on the right shoulder indicating rank of corporal. So professional soldier, militiaman might wear a hunting shirt like you see here, made from linen. Now the militiaman, he might train a few times per year. So he was a citizen soldier, part-time soldier.
C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast.
And can anybody define Minuteman? The Minutemen were who?
We'll get ready in a minute.
Right, prepared at a moment's notice. The Minutemen might train on a weekly basis. So those are the three different types of soldiers you might find in an encampment. But if the soldier wasn't cooking or cleaning, he was drilling and taking care of his weapons.
I want to make a couple of notes that are hyper-specific to where we are right now. One is to say von Steuben was probably, and I think I'm fairly certain, literally right here. So we have a wonderful primary source, Pennsylvania officer who was with Anthony Wayne coming down with Lafayette here, who left behind a military journal. And he said, oh, we encamped in Williamsburg behind the college. Williamsburg is a lovely town, not much business there. Seems to mostly be the place where gentlemen live. Remember, the capital is left for Richmond, so there's less business than there used to be. When Washington and Rochambeau arrive about 2 weeks after these folks do, he says general joy has broken out across the camp to be reinforced, and von Steuben is starting to drill all of the troops coming through together here, Denny says, at the site. He calls Steuben and their oracle. He talks about him producing military experiments. They're doing different maneuvers to prepare for different kind of conditions they might meet on the battlefield at Yorktown, and they're doing it very, very quickly because the whole army's only here. Though Lafayette's troops in camp here for 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, the whole army's only here for about 6 days. That's on the other, mostly on the other side of town. I have one other note while we're on it, and I wonder if maybe you can help me comment on this. I have an anecdote about a Jonathan Siemens whose his pension petition says he came here to the college camp to train in 1776 in the Minuteman service, but camp fever broke out because this place was unhealthful, and he was sent away to Dumfries to be inoculated. So obviously water is not the only thing that will help keep you healthful in this life, but I wonder about particular locations for being inoculated and why you can't be inoculated here. What do you know? What do you think?
Okay. Well, that's kind of one of the ironies of the war and camp life. The soldier was actually in more danger in camp than he was fighting on the battlefield. So typically the enlisted soldiers slept 6 to a small A-frame tent. 6 men per tent, 500 men in a regimental encampment. Keep in mind, before the war, the soldiers were farmers in desolate areas. So when you take someone who's basically lived in isolation up until age 18 or 20, and then you cram them together into a camp, contagious disease is going to have quite an impact. The worst disease and the most prevalent disease in camp was dysentery. So the consumption of dirty food and dirty water, and also smallpox was an issue for a time, but the soldiers were inoculated. George Washington survived a bout of smallpox when he was a younger man, and he realized the importance of inoculating his troops. So if they went into a winter encampment, they were still for a few months and didn't plan on fighting, that would be an ideal opportunity to inoculate the troops.
So here's a question, drawing some more of this together. Pop quiz, framing statement. So remember, Cornwallis also encamped in Williamsburg for about a week, right? Late June, early July, 1781, on his way to go fortify Yorktown. And we know he's kicking Bishop Madison out of the college president's house. So one of the questions we have about this encampment site unanswered is, did the British also encamp here that summer? So 2 pop quiz questions. 1, and does anyone remember the only reference to Williamsburg in the Cornwallis papers that we read? What did it say? Era. It gets supplies there, and anyone else?
Dislodge Lafayette
Dislodge Lafayette, who is where?
in Williamsburg.
Well, Lafayette's partly in Williamsburg, but he's also,
Oh yes, in Richmond.
he's in Richmond, he's mainly behind the army in Richmond. And 30 says it's a healthful place because they are also beset by disease in that summer of 1781. So I wanted to think with you for a second, and you too, Rob, about the question of whether or not, if Cornwallis is in town with maybe as many as, we don't know, he's got 7,000 soldiers, he has a whole bunch of camp followers, remember, because so many thousands of enslaved people have come to follow Cornwallis's camp, so some number of thousands of people have come to Williamsburg. Whether he uses this encampment site while the barracks are still standing over there is hard to say, but do we like this as a defensive position if we know Lafayette's behind us? That's the Richmond Road over there, goes to Richmond.
Okay.
What do you think?
I'm not all that familiar with the surrounding landscape, but obviously one of the criteria for a good campsite would be, is it easily defensible? And the selection of a campsite is going to fall to the quartermaster. So not only is the quartermaster in charge of supplying the army, one of his responsibilities involves picking a good campsite. So you need to pick a spot on high ground, one that's for health. You don't want to camp in a marshy, swampy type of terrain, because what could happen? Disease, lots of mosquitoes carrying malaria. During this time period, surgeons and medical professionals, they believed in a theory called miasma, where bad air led to disease. So high ground, lots of good airflow. You probably want to be near a town or a good highway perhaps, and you need to be able to observe the enemy. So I would pose the question, is that what we have here, basically? Good campsite or a bad campsite, in y'all's expert opinion?
You grew up here, and you like the landscape from here to Richmond and the high grounds that are available. What do you think?
Yeah, so when you're going through Williamsburg, like Williamsburg today, how much elevation change do you see? Do you see lots of hills? Do you see some hills?
You don't really see a lot.
You don't see a lot.
It's pretty flat.
Pretty flat, because the roads right now, we grade them, right? We just keep them as is. One of the things that we talked about in class was that one mound that was like kind of interesting, that was off campus near the Ludwell Mill, and it went around that high point. So during that time, you wouldn't have just flat spaces which you were driving. You would be going through the ravines and things like that. So now I want you to stop and think about the campus at a really micro level. If you were to walk from here to the amphitheater at Lake Matoka, so you're going to Lake Matoka from here, you're going to go straight from this spot, you're going to go through those woods right there. No pathways. You can't use any asphalt or wooden pathways.
Because they don't exist.
They don't exist. What is it like walking from here to the amphitheater? Is there up and down, or is it flat? You're nodding. Tell me more. Describe it.
It's going to be harder.
It's going to be harder.
There's a ravine there.
Yeah.
You would have to get through the ravine.
You might not
Yeah.
be able to go in a straight line.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to go in a straight line. That's the first thing, right? You're going to have to figure out ravines. Where do I want to cross the water? Those types of things. So when we think about a high point in Williamsburg, because we are so close to the ocean, we are not a high elevation. We're not like in the mountains. Something as you're thinking about a ravine, and more so on that side than on this side of where we are because of the man-made structures over here, as we're going up, we have this whole ridge line. And I know we're hearing a lot of noise from construction right now, but there's a reason why construction happens there. It's the high point, right? It's the spot that we want to put new buildings. It's the spot that you want to encamp because it is that high point on campus. Like SWIM itself, the library.
Oh, yeah.
SWIM is up a ravine, but then it actually kind of dips down and is a little bit low. If you are walking down Landrum Drive and you're making your way through the ravine and you come up on the Wildflower Refuge, and let's say we're walking towards the Wren building, we still have ravines in there. You've got to imagine without all of these asphalt pathways, which are lovely and enable us to get really quickly from class to class, but for them, they are going to be trudging through, and you know, we've been hearing the leaves rustling. All of that noise is also going to be there in the fall and the winter. In the summer, it's going to be, how many of you have been here in like May, right? Okay, now add 20 degrees or more to it, right? And it's hot and it's sticky and it's just, ugh, right? So you're not walking fast unless you need to. And you're meandering through these high points because as you go from here to Richmond, it's going to be the same way. There's going to be ravines. They're going to be coming across these pathways. Now, at that point, there are roads. They say roads on here, right? But what does those roads look like in the 1700s?
Gross.
Gross?
Yeah.
Okay. Dirt.
They're not 100% even.
Yeah. They're not 100% even. Yeah, so we're going to have some unevenness.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're not going to be flat in the sense that they are now.
Yeah. How many of you have ever been on a dirt road in a vehicle today? All right. So close your eyes. Imagine that carriage. Imagine the sound of the wooden wheels that are compacting against the ground, right? And it's creating tread marks through the ground. Because that's what happens on a dirt road, right? When you come to a spot that's a little too deep and you don't want your transportation to bottom out, what do?
Swerve around it.
Swerve around it. Guess what they did? Swerved around really big, large holes or places where they might not know how deep the water is. So all of these things that are happening along these roads that they're calling roads, but that we know as like asphalt roads today. Nice, smooth roads. Like we're really kind of happy about our taxpayer dollars going towards that. But during this time, no one's maintaining the road. And lots of people are traversing it on horse and carriage, right? And horse and carrying lots of things on the wagon behind. Like there's lots of that taking place. So when we're thinking about who's coming from where and how they're traveling, we've got to imagine it in a very different way than we imagine today. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was point out, kind of like you said, I think in last week's class, you kind of get an idea of it if you've ever driven on Quarter Path Road behind the strip mall.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, Quarter Path Road in Williamsburg. Example number one of a rough road, right? They don't want us to use that road. They keep part of it dirt. It's one of our oldest roads that is not asphalted over. So those conditions are really, really close to what we would have seen, other than there would be cut marks from the wheels, right? And imagine if you're trying to bring cannons.
Right. Yeah.
Because how are they bringing the cannons to Williamsburg or to Yorktown? How are they traversing across this landscape?
Well, the lighter cannons are going to be about 1,500 pounds, and it's going to require a team of horses to pull that cannon. You'll notice in the blue book that I passed along the image of the camp. A lot of the materials are going to be placed onto a wagon train and pulled with the army. So the men are going to march with maybe about 30 or 40 pounds worth of gear. They would be equipped with a knapsack like you see here, basically a backpack. They might also be carrying a haversack on their hip. So the men are marching. The wagons are behind them, and then you've got thousands of pounds worth of artillery to pull as well. So in the drier times, it's going to kick up a lot of dust. What is even worse than that? A dry road would be, right, a muddy roads. So travel is very difficult. At least by the time of the Civil War, the armies are using the railroads and the trains. During Revolutionary War, none of that. So you can either travel by foot or maybe wagon and horseback or by ship. So that's one of the things that really impresses and amazes me, the logistical challenges that these armies overcame, trying to march and pull wagons on very rudimentary roads without any sort of railway or trains.
And I can say two very specific things about this site and moving supplies around. One thing I can say is that at the Battle of Green Spring, which we talked about last week, one of the outcomes which was so disastrous for part of Lafayette's army was that the British killed nearly all of the artillery horse. So actually being resupplied by San Simone and connecting with San Simone later in the summer, whose artillery was also on our campus closer to Richmond Road, would have really made probably a difference for ability to move supplies. We also have a pension application from a person who mentions the college camp, a man who had been born into slavery by the name of Richard Spinner, who was manumitted at the very beginning of the war, unknown reasons, and enlisted first for a 3-year term under his own name and then allowed another person to pay him to serve a second 4-year term. So he's making a living as a wagoner. And the reference he makes in his pension application fascinated me because he said, well, when Washington and Rochambeau's army arrived, the French had a great deal of baggage that came in to the College Landing. So one of the things that he's doing is moving huge amounts of supplies in his wagons from College Landing to locations ringing Williamsburg. So we can imagine Richard Spinner coming in with his wagon, although by exactly what path from the Richmond Road is a question I would love to answer.
Well, think about that. So College Creek and College Landing, they still exist today. So College Landing is on what is South Henry Street now. So if you're coming from that space, you're going to come up South Henry Street. So imagine the intersection of that with one of the first streets that you notice are around what we call colonial Williamsburg today.
At that point, you would have passed Tazewell Hall, because John the Tory Randolph's house would have still been out there. No,
right.
No law school yet.
No law school. The graveyards, maybe, that are on the right, they may have been graveyards at that point in time, but they're large open fields. It may have had something that was growing there. Then we come up, and the first building that is a large building that we notice from that direction is the hospital. So remember, that was the public asylum and formal hospital of Williamsburg. Imagine those noises that you're hearing from that space. So you're bringing all of this up. You're coming in. Are you going to go to Duke of Gloucester Street? Maybe. Maybe you're stopping at Francis, but that doesn't make sense because remember, we've got kind of weird curves. Like, we want to take straight routes when you're doing lots and lots of carrying of heavy things. So if we come up Duke of Gloucester Street, how easy is it to get onto Richmond Road? Yeah. Very easy. We're just making that like curve at what we call Confusion Corner or College Corner today, right? You're just making a slight curve, and then we're coming along, right? So we've literally come from College Creek up the road, come up by the public hospital, hit Duke of Gloucester Street, and now we're carrying it out to here. Now, artillery. Why is the artillery here and not over here? Like, it sounds like artillery today, right? With the construction. But why is that artillery there really close to the road and not all the way back here?
It doesn't have to be dragged all the way.
Right. You don't want to have to drag that too far off the road.
You said the lightest one is 1,500 pounds? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, a 6-pounder light gun would weigh about 1,500 pounds total, carriage and all. And there are heavier siege guns that weigh about 5,000 pounds. So that's going to take a lot of energy to move. Of course, the heavier the gun, the nicer it would be to bring those in on ships.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that the French did to really help out during the siege of Yorktown. They brought in heavier siege guns by ships because they controlled the bay and the York River. but the lighter guns would be pulled with the Army, with a team of horses.
So it makes me think about I know there's been research on the ecological impact of this massive army of 20,000, that's just the Americans and French, in Yorktown, but it makes me wonder about the ecological impact on the campus too.
Right.
Well, so let me say this, I want to, for the rest of the class, I want to take a minute to think with you about some interpretive possibilities of, now that we can find this site, how we should think about it, before I raise what I think I see as the sort of three big themes here, and ask you to tell me if any of them are important, and if they're important, how we should think about them. Do either of you have more general comments about either the landscape, the encampment, the soldiers, what they would have done or been like?
Well, I think one of the things that I would mention is on the map, there's a little bit of the York River and there's a lot of the James River, right? Because remember that the map itself is, this is north on the map.
Right.
When gathers it up. Here, there we go. It's a group effort on the map. But remembering that the York River is up here, and Yorktown, as we move down, is going to be off of the map a little bit. Jamestown is on the map. And so those are our two landmarks that we really know. And today we would traverse that along the Colonial Parkway. That's not necessarily how that was happening, but those routes are somewhat similar. You're going to bring things across the peninsula, either around or across. And thinking about the major roads that we see on a historic map that still exist today, because they're the highest points. Like, you don't want to have a muddy road that holds water. You want it to be up on a ridge line, and that's why Richmond Road is where Richmond Road is as it goes from Williamsburg to Richmond. Same thing with Jamestown. Our modern roads are interesting because we have to cross bridges to get into Williamsburg. Guess what? They had to cross bridges to get into Williamsburg at the time. Wooden, not concrete and asphalt like we know, but thinking about how small that area I was showing you, how this area that we're talking about with the university plays into the larger context of all that is going on in this map and beyond. Excuse me. So I think that's important to think about. How are we getting from here to Yorktown, where you are going to be interpreting, and where that final space is that we're thinking about Cornwallis and all of those parts and pieces. But thinking about that scale.
C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Lectures in History podcast.
Imagine it.
And it's also so socially complex. I ran into so many petitions that noted more than 5 changes of command in 1781, many of them in this camp. There are multiple people who say, and then I came to Williamsburg and I was changed about in my regimental orders so often I can no longer remember who my commanding officers were, because one of the reasons I think we can't say with a ton of confidence exactly which regiments would have been encamped here, who would have encamped here, is that when Washington arrives, it's chess, right? He's basically reconfiguring the whole army. Different people served under Lafayette at Yorktown that had come with him to Williamsburg. So whether or not those reconfigurations are happening in this camp or happening on the road, I think I also don't know enough to say for sure, but it is part of what makes this place socially lively and quite fascinating. Okay, here are my 3 themes, so you can get your public historian caps on. Theme 1 will be this encampment site is important because it was a place where people became Americans. And I have a lot to say about that. Theme 2 will be this camp is important because it was an extremely international place. And theme 3, this camp is important because it's a place where people transitioned in and out of military life. This is a place where people became soldiers, and it is a place where they were discharged and they became civilians again. And actually, if you've ever spoken to veterans, maybe some of you are veterans, I don't know, that actually this moment of being discharged, coming out of the Army is often one that has a quite monumental significance in their memories. All right, An American Place. Here are some of the things I saw, big picture patterns, as I looked through approximately 3,000 petition records that mentioned having been in Williamsburg. Some of the people I'll mention may not have been at this camp, but a lot of them were. I tried to control for people who were here in the right time period, for the college camp to have seen many thousands of people, 1775 to 1777, or else being here with Lafayette. So, One person who came with a Culpeper militia very early in the war, when this place was first starting up as a camp, said the people of Williamsburg looked quite skeptically at soldiers when they arrived here. The people of Williamsburg, hearing we came from the backwoods and seeing our savage-looking equipment, seemed as much afraid of us as if we had been Indians. But once we demeaned ourselves as patriots and gentlemen, they treated us with great kindness and respect. So many of the people who served here were teenagers, many of them younger than you, because most of you are seniors. And many of them had not been very far out of their counties in their lives before. So when we say becoming Americans, one of the interesting things about the early period is they're becoming Virginians. They're meeting people from other Virginia places. There is a mixture of Virginia life that is happening here in the college camp, as massive numbers of people are forcibly called into military service from all around. There is, because of the nature of military life, by 1781, when admixtures of people are here, at least, from Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, and the whole Rhode Island Regiment came with Washington. There are people from all around. Steuben is pulling together the Virginia militia. So there are people from all around who are sort of reconvening here at that stage. And when you see notes from them, they're often comparing themselves to each other, sometimes flatteringly. Many of the people who comment at all on Washington and Rochambeau's arrival, aside from bespeaking joy, say, "Oh, these eastward soldiers who've come, they're all old soldiers. They're the best soldiers that we have because they've been through so much." There's a lot of inexperience beforehand. And then the other thing I'll say that makes this seem like an American place for 1A is I see a lot of accounts very early on, when there's all these very young people early in the war at college camp, of delinquency. I point at Sophie not as a delinquent, but as a student, as a scholar of delinquency. So we mentioned before, the summer of 1776, just as news would have been reaching Williamsburg of a Declaration of Independence, Philadelphia, we get a whole slew of Virginia Gazette notices of delinquency. So the aforementioned Tom, an indentured servant with a swarthy complexion, age 14 years, 4 years left to serve as an indentured servant, ran away carrying a whole bunch of razors because he was indentured as a barber. So I was listening to you talk about the need to shave, and I thought, oh, Tom was a useful person in this camp. He ran away a couple of days after one Henry Williams was cashiered and drummed along the line, and all that the Virginia Gazette says is that he had behaved in a scandalous or infamous manner. So our guesses as to what a scandalous or infamous manner. Do you care to comment on the topic, Rob?
A scandalous manner?
Yeah, I don't know. It could be a lot of things. It seems like to me it could be theft or debauchery or any number of other things.
He drummed upon the line. That's really fascinating.
This is you guys know what this is? A ritual of shame, right? So this is a very long line of soldiers who were basically allowed to degrade you as you were drummed out of the service. And the line, the Virginia Gazette says that it stretched from Williamsburg through the college camp. I mean, we have to imagine a very long line for Henry Williams, whatever he did. It was a spectacle that said, "Don't be like Henry Williams," to keep military discipline.
I'll add to that. Public humiliation, very powerful form of punishment. If you were caught stealing, you were insubordinate, you were disorderly in terms of your appearance, you might wear a sign and walk around camp. Everybody would know what you did. They also would sometimes run the gauntlet. I don't know if that's the case with the figure you just mentioned.
That's not what the Gazette said.
You line up and you might get hit as you run the gauntlet. But for other offenses, you could get flogged. So you do have thousands of very young soldiers in one compact place. And if they do have some downtime, there wasn't much downtime in camp. They were typically busy doing something. But if they were idle, that does open up the opportunity for misconduct, and the Army would dish out those sorts of punishments.
1B, this is an American place. This is a racially integrated place. We know this already from our class, and we that the Continental Army and in fact the Virginia regiments were racially integrated. Integrated does not mean non-hierarchical or egalitarian. What it means is that there were always African American soldiers of varying statuses in the camps and serving formally in the Army from the beginning. So in the college camp, the old laws that had excluded free black people from militia service don't seem to have applied. So we have James Harris, who is from a free black family, a very long-standing, so from the 17th century free family in Charles City County, who enlisted in the militia already in, see if my card is right, 1776. Serves a year-long term, making it up to, it must be 77. He's dispatched with the Virginia 2nd, which is the main regiment that trained here, to quote, that terrible winter at Valley Forge. So he was here. Something in the ballpark of 5,000 to 8,000 African American soldiers had served in the entire Continental Forces and militia, but the number is disproportionately higher at Yorktown, as we've discussed a bit in class. So we have, and Rob, maybe you want to comment on this, but we have foreign officers who are guesstimating numbers of African American soldiers with the American forces that are probably overly high at a quarter, with the current thinking being like something like 1 in 10 to 15% of the forces who were here were African descended people.
Yeah, I think grand total for the war on the American side, something like 5,000 soldiers total were African American or formerly enslaved.
But it also was that the British, were they using any?
They were.
Yeah.
And at a higher rate, it's fair to say.
Correct.
The exceptional case of the very famous Billy Flora, I'll note here, in part because I think it's quite possible that he was both here when this was a college camp. We can say in any case that he was among the people, officially a free black man, who was serving at Great Bridge. So the first military encounter in Virginia against Dunmore's forces in the winter of 1775. And he was also at Yorktown, which is to say, he also had a lot of service in between. He had quite an exceptional military career. He served with quite exceptional valor at Great Bridge, which is what makes him, I think, quite a famous case. All right, so that's theme one. It's an American place. Lots of kinds of people coming together and meeting each other and figuring out how to work together or being forced to work together, as the case may be. Theme two, it's an international place. Were the British here? I don't know. I don't know if they were literally right here, but I do know that they were in town, and I do know that there are people who supported them, as do you. One of the reasons I think that it makes sense to me to imagine the use of this site is in part because Lafayette's chasing them down the Richmond Road. So I think this is a space that makes sense to me even before I realized that Cornwallis is headquartered down at the President's house. The French, of course, are more than half of the forces, the American Allied forces, here in 1781. The accents you would have heard here at the college camp would have included, of course, West African dialectical accents, as well as Scottish and German. You would have heard a lot of French language. Some of the so-called French soldiers were from the Alsace or were otherwise German-speaking. When we think about how this camp would have sounded, one of the things you can imagine is the exchange of lots of languages. I have the case petitioner John Heitz, living in Ohio, who, so when Lafayette got here, he'd just been on a diplomatic mission to France, 1779-80, and a whole bunch of people came back and joined Rochambeau, and this guy, I think, is one of them. And he said, my job, because I knew German and French and English, was to move among all the locations and essentially be a translator. I also have a petition from someone born Andreas Mischler. The petitioner's name is Andrew Michael, living in New York, and he says, after struggling and aiding and contending for the blessed American cause of liberty, conjuring your honor, the pension commissioner, to be placed on the pension list, equal with many others, although I was not born in their country. Which is to say, he served with Saint-Simon as a French person, and he stayed, and he became American and petitions for a pension, not for service with the American Army, but for service with the French Army as a person who became American. All right, international place. Theme three. A place of transition into and out of military life. So one of the interesting things I think that I saw in these petitions, when this was the college camp, early in the war, there's not a shortage of people whose entire military service that they later apply for pensions out of took place right here in Williamsburg, because their job was to guard the Capitol. They might have moved among Williamsburg places somewhat to do that service, but oddly enough, I went to Williamsburg, I became a soldier, I was discharged at Williamsburg and went home. That is the story that some people have of their entire military career. I have the very interesting, the Military Journal of Ebenezer Denny, this aforementioned Pennsylvanian, who says, and I bring this up because I'm trying to help us remember that these people are like us in the sense that I assume that none of you have had experience of war, and then they're having experience of war. So he's with Lafayette's Encampment. We know he's here at the camp. That summer, he says he's at one of these summer battles, and I think it was Spencer's Ordinary, when he sees people wounded in battle for the first time, and he says, "I'm sick to my stomach, and I have to find a way to conquer this feeling, but it feels terrible." So their becoming soldiers is not psychologically or practically a simple matter, right? They're experiencing something new. Let's see. This is a place of general discharge, which means sometimes when they're trying to prove that they ever served in the military, having your discharge papers so that you can say, "I didn't desert, I was discharged honorably," is important. Nearly none of them kept them because it's not like they knew there'd ever be a pension act. So some people were also generally discharged, meaning you're all free to go, basically. They never were given a piece of paper. So you get a whole bunch of people who say that they were discharged at Williamsburg at the college camp. So this is not just a place of becoming a soldier, but then becoming a civilian again. I think the last thing I'll say is we can stand here and think about our campus very locally, but 2nd, 5th, 6th, 7th Virginia regiments were here and then left to serve not just at Great Bridge to see the burning of Norfolk, but also Valley Forge, Monmouth, Germantown, Point South. A whole bunch of people who trained in Williamsburg were part of the forces captured at Charleston, which is to say this was a place before all of the difficult experience of their lives occurred. This was a place before all of that happened, when they were becoming the people who would see it.
And that ties into my closing remarks, if it's time for that.
Please.
Typically, when you think about the life of a soldier, you get this vision of fighting on a battlefield. The soldier only fought a few days out of the year. If he was involved in a siege, it might be a few weeks out of the year. But for most of the time, he was in a camp. Camp life was monotonous, lots of drill, lots of cooking and cleaning, and it was also dangerous. So as I mentioned before, the camp was actually more dangerous than the battlefield. In terms of figures, the museum where I work estimates that there were about 26,000 American deaths during the war, 19,000 stemming from disease. And a lot of that disease developed in these encampments. So I think that this is a useful lecture and activity, studying camp life at a campsite, providing a fuller picture of the soldier's experience. And I just think to myself, you know, how many students have passed right through this area? Probably many thousands at this point, and most of them probably did not know that there was a camp located right here.
Super close to none of them, one would think. Well, so this is the time for you to say, this space is not new to you. Some of you live up here, and some of you pass through many times a day because you eat at CAF or whatever. And I wonder whether or not, that question I asked you in my Blackboard note last week about whether it changes your sense of place, whether or not it's possible for the histories, either of this as an American place, an international place, a place of becoming a soldier, becoming a civilian, do they speak to any of our values? Are these histories important to share? Which of them are important to share, if any?
I think addressing your first question of does it change your idea of the place, I'd always kind of considered any sort of revolutionary activity in Williamsburg as kind of cultural exchange, but it really kind of goes back to your first theme where it's the idea of becoming an American, and now I'm kind of thinking of it as a place of where you're creating culture and you're creating identity instead of just finding something that already existed in other people. You're kind of taking the best of what all those different people experience and the different perspectives that they brought and creating this sense of place and community.
So it is a new formation that makes something, yeah. Charlotte.
I think it's interesting how spaces change over time, because for the longest time I didn't know that the college camp was here, and like I would come down here just to be in nature and relax, but it's interesting to think that a couple hundred years ago this was not at all a relaxing place. This was like where tension would be almost at its highest. Either you're doing drills 8 hours a day, you're cooking, you're dying in your bed because you're dying of dysentery or smallpox. Just the way that it has done a 180 from being a place of horror, of war and terror, to just, you know, a place to study and a place to relax.
You had something, Gavin, I think, no?
Sure. We call ourselves the United States. I despise Rhode Island. I just don't like the guys. But
It's not an island.
we like them. I mean, we like all Americans. We like people from different states. And they all come down to these camps 300 or 250 years ago. And we find sympathy with one another. We might hate them because they're rural or they're too urban. They're from the coast. They're from the mountains. But it's nice to see that as a nation-building project, it's been coming from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It came from the bottom up as well as up to down.
Yeah.
There's a sense of, I don't know, bottom up. I feel like most of our histories are top down. We get told what George Washington did, what Mr. whatever, Sir whatever, but we get to hear what average Joe did from Rhode Island, and I think it's important.
So the intuitions I'm hearing so far are partly that you're less interested in Lafayette and the sort of great man top-down history than the experience, the social experience of the camp. There are different people from different places. Because maybe in part because as the campus expanded to make this campsite it's been a part of our campus for over a century, there's something about that actually speaks to the way we think about the university as a project as well, right? You had something, Tyler? Nope. Alexa.
I have a question that I think would inform my answer to your questions, just based on the research I've been doing, is that do we know if Robert Murch or other Native allies were a part of this internationalism becoming of America?
Actually, speaking somewhat to the opposite, if I think about what I know about Native history in this camp so far, I can't put Robert Murch here, but I can say that there are people who left this camp to fight the Cherokee in the winter of 1776, 1777, whose entire military experience was training at the college camp and then burning Cherokee villages in present-day North Carolina. Which is all to say, this is a violent project. This is a project of violence as well. These were British allied Native people, but we now think about the Cherokee engagements as part of a bigger Cherokee war that outlasts the revolution. And your answer is, do you have an answer now, or do you want to think about it more?
I just feel like, I feel like it's hard because I think all of these things are true, and I also think just, of the university as a whole, especially when looking at it through a Native lens, I think there's even more violence, even more exclusion. When you're talking about becoming America, you read that quote, but that quote was about, it was using Indian in a pejorative way and savage. Yeah. And so even from the beginning, there was a creation of other for the people whose land this is. And this war that we're fighting includes them on all sides and also is fighting to take their land.
So a skepticism of the basic national project remains here in the mix. Yeah. Matt.
It's interesting, if you take away the sort of greater ideals of the whole system, to look at the sort of experiences of the individual soldiers, because a lot of them, they get here and they don't really know what to do. There's not really a system in place for their training. There's officers, yes, but only a couple really have prior military experience. And so everyone's just sort of a little bit figuring it out as they go.
This social creativity bit of it is what is kind of coming out of this. So
But also, think about you and your experience. You came here knowing your place and home. And you came here and had to learn this place and may or may not call it home. And for those soldiers, they were dealing with those same types of themes, right? Like they were trying to figure out, like y'all in your first semester, do you remember like trying to figure out how to get food back to where you were sleeping? Imagine everything's looking somewhat similar. You're trying to figure out that navigation piece, not only physical navigation on the landscape, but that cultural piece. And so I can totally see how that resonates. I mean, you talked about the dispersion of forces. I mean, I think
North,
about
south, sometimes both.
Yeah, and thinking about like the end of a semester. Some people leave at certain times, some people leave at another time, or even holidays. Like we're coming up on a holiday. Some people will leave on, 3 days before another person. Yeah. And how does that happen?
There are all these really, I didn't say it, but there are these wonderful pension records where people have to give attestations for each other. Like I can affirm this guy was in the Army. I met him at Williamsburg, then I ran into him again at Monmouth. And there's a kind of reunion and rendezvous element of this. Here's my last thing. There exists a memorial to the college camp. It simultaneously attempts to memorialize the college company, which, as you know, is an entirely different thing. It states that the college camp was here at the top of the sunken garden, which we know it wasn't. The best thing about that monument is that it exists, and memory, I think, is usually good to have in the mix because it gives you something to talk about. The questions that it raises now that we know how far it is into our campus from where most tourists will ever go, how far the college camp actually was, is whether it's sufficient. Did any of you get far enough in your thinking that you want to propose a kind of form of memory, either an encampment, a lecture, a statue, a plaque, a book, something else to more broadly beyond our 12-person class commemorate the college camp? Gavin.
This part of campus, this little triangle thing, it's one of the least remembered parts of campus. I don't think anyone comes here and is like, the weird triangle thing.
Actually, no one has even passed during our classes.
Right, these lamps don't work. The construction's right there. There's no reason to be here.
Yeah.
When we pass through this place, I feel like it would be at least useful to have a little plaque, a little stamp that says, hey, at one point, 3,000 people were right here, like you, coming from all over the country, fighting for what they thought was good, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe it doesn't have to be conclusive, it doesn't have to be nation building necessarily, but I think at least recognizing that this part of campus that we think is unimportant was important at one point. Maybe it is still important today. Maybe I still want those lights to be redone, and it annoys me to this day.
It has to do with construction.
They will come back on, no doubt. Note the high ground is the encampment site. We are on a piece of land that lets us understand the logic of why the encampment would have actually been up, crossing Ucrop up there. So I don't know if that changes your mind with a new cafeteria space, probably is just about under the encampment site. How about Tyler, did I see you?
This is more, I guess, something idealistic. Is it possible to reconstruct the camp for special occasions, to put, I guess, sort of tents out here?
So basically, you like the idea of some kind of embodied or reenactment kind of way that you could see social complexity, that you could maybe talk to people who had different experiences, different reasons for being there. You could sort of see it and engage with it at least to some degree for what it was. Which I think was what we like to think happens at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown's encampment site. It becomes all of a sudden a real life human space where different kinds of people had different jobs and problems. Sophie.
I was gonna kind of agree with Gavin's point. I've lived on this side of campus for the whole 4 years, and there are a lot of people that after their freshman year, they never touch this side of campus again. Like, if you don't have a reason to be over here because you live there, there's really, you don't find yourself over here a lot. And so I think that being able to identify a more significant history than just I lived there my freshman year, I think would be meaningful to a lot of people. And being able to kind of have a historical knowledge of the area where you spent that really influential first year of college could be really impactful for a lot of people, because you see a lot more of that done for like the Wren building side of campus, and I think that being able to inform people of that history would just be important overall to the legacy that we're trying to tie to this camp and the meaning that it has in modern times.
Not all of campus history took place around the Wren building as part of the logic of it. Derek and then Alexa, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if some of that has to do with kind of the way the college often describes its own history. I mean, historic campus, old campus, new campus. I mean, this is thought of as new campus. This is thought of as a 20th century area, so to speak. And I feel like, you know, that's how it's described on tours. You know, that's how it's described when you visit here for, you know, as a high schooler. So I feel like, well, obviously, there's a reason they do that, because it is a description of how it is used now. I do wonder if that has to do with this area of campus not only being thought of as historical, even if in many ways it is just as historical as the places that are considered historic and old campus.
That's such a good point,
Yes.
because you know, this part of campus has a new name. It's West Campus. And the reason why it's West Campus is because when we were looking at the long-term plan of the university, the architects were like, and what do you call this part of campus? And everybody said, we really don't have a name for it. So it was named West Campus because it's the western part of our campus.
Is that because new campus is too large an area?
Right.
That we're sort of splitting it down into a smaller, I see.
Right, and at the same time, you have Arts Quarter. When you all were touring here, that was not called the Arts Quarter. So names do change across the landscape.
I think I loved Derek's comment in part because it speaks to my own affect. When the georeference map was revealed to me, when I slid the tool, I gasped. I was like, oh, that is in an extremely well-trafficked part of campus where I drive my car every day and have never once thought about the American Revolution, not even once. It kind of opens up how many invisible histories we're walking amongst. I don't know. Alexa.
Two things. One, just to jump off of that, since we saw that map, I live down Jamestown. Like every time I think about the what may or may not be an Indian burial mound, like every time I drive by there. But yeah, I was kind of gonna like say a similar thing. Like also, if we're thinking about if the plaque is currently on the Sunken Gardens, and if we're trying to add historicity, yeah, to this side of campus to like bring it back. If we're have a new section of campus opening up, like what better way than to have the plaque by the new cafeteria or the new bridge that connects the campus to say like, just because this stuff is new doesn't mean that this part of campus wasn't important and wasn't a place that like that prepared for the Battle of Yorktown, that shows that this part of campus is just as important as where these kids come out.
There seems to be more charisma in the 1781 before Yorktown part of the story than in the college camp era of the story, question mark? Tyler?
You, Dr. Schroeder, do you know if this is a spot for the pre-college program? Do the pre-college kids come here? Because you could relate to them saying how it would be students of their age that would have enlisted as militiamen in these camps.
You're talking about our pre-college program in American history, the summer students who come here. We think that they're going to be living in the West Woods dorms this summer, and we've already been talking about doing some new interpretive work to, we would love to do something that also trains some tour guides a little bit differently too. Well, does anyone have any final comments, what you imagine now, thoughts about the space of the campus that you want to say before? Thanks for coming out in the field for our non-Wednesday, Monday field experience. We are going to meet in the classroom on Wednesday to talk about the French occupation and overwintering 1781-82 and carry on with our project of building a public-facing tour of the campus and the Revolution. Thanks, everyone. All right.
To find more of our history programming, visit our website at c-span.org.